Hi everyone, and welcome to our tour of the JASA LSED Risk Detector application. This app is designed to be used by social workers in the field who are visiting with elderly people who may be at risk of housing problems, consumer debt problems, or financial exploitation. The social worker will sit with the client, perhaps share the screen with the client. As the fact values are gathered in the conversation, the system uses rules and algorithms to assess the risk that the client faces. For each of these three areas, a risk level is set along with an overall risk level. As soon as the session is completed, the system emails a report detailing its findings to the legal staff at the appropriate agency, and that agency can then start following up right away. The session starts with an introduction, gathers some information about the user, and then lets the social worker choose between a standard analysis or an express. If the user chooses standard, this is the sequence that takes place, with the user having the choice to skip any of these topics. But if the user chooses the express analysis, there's a more streamlined flow. So that's the big picture of how this application works. Now let's take some runs through it. Let's say that we are with the JASA organization. Let's say my name is John. I am the social worker in this case. And for this run, let's choose the express analysis. Instructions for the social worker are highlighted in yellow. Some basic profile information there on the client. And this is an important question, whether the client rents or owns. If the client owns, then there's going to be a lot more questions pertaining to financial exploitation. And here we have our page of questions. Now, because this is the express analysis, it's going to be all on one page, trying to minimize the amount of clicks. The social worker should make these choices based on the client's statements and the social worker's own observations and interpretations of the client's situation. So let's say I choose these three. I'm therefore asked for some additional details, which I'd provide here. This question enables the social worker to emphasize whether the need is particularly urgent or not. Let's go down to financial exploitation. Finally, we have a catch-all category of other concerns. I'll say yes to that. Okay, so it's very straightforward. You just have to answer the questions, and then the rules underlying the system will interpret the level of risk associated with those selections. Here, we're now giving the user a recap of what we've found, and the user has a chance to go back and change any of these if, on reflection, these don't seem to be accurate. Here's a question about photographs. It's asking if there are any conditions or papers that the user feels can and should be photographed, and if so, there's instructions on taking the photographs. Now the session is done. This was quick because it is the express analysis. Here's the report. We have a risk finding of very high, and that is based on the fact that all of these flags have been identified. The report contains some relevant resources that might be helpful to the attorneys reviewing this report or the social worker who gets a copy by email. It lays out next steps and it gives a complete transcript. So that is the result of the express analysis. Now let's run the session again, and we'll choose standard. So we're going to have a longer session. This time, let's say the client owns his or her home. And now we're getting asked for more detail regarding the client's profile. So we answer all those. Here's our topic selection screen. By default, all three are selected. So starting with housing, there's a series of questions here pertaining to foreclosure. These questions allow the user to specify any particular problems regarding housing. Here's a recap for housing. I can check that, and if I'm satisfied with these inputs, I move on. Next topic is consumer debt. Regarding consumer debt, this client seems to be in good shape. Here's the recap, indicating that no red flags have been identified. If this is correct, I'll move on to topic 3 of 3, which is financial exploitation. This one's a bit longer. Here on lawsuits, let's say there are no lawsuits and there's no judgment. And now here regarding banking fraud, have you noticed anything unusual? Let's say yes. In that case, we need to provide some narrative information. We're moving on to signs of scams. Next, theft. And finally, under financial exploitation, we're being asked about signs of property fraud or predatory lending. These questions are appearing because we indicated that the user owns his or her home. We have a recap of financial exploitation to make sure that everything we put in here is correct. If it is, we can move on. The question about the photographs, off screen here asking for any additional comments, and a statement on the overall risk, which in this case is very high because the inputs that we gave indicate that there is a lot of questionable activity. When we show the report, there's a link for downloading it in Word. This report is more lengthy than the Express report. Summary of the client, description of the overall finding, and the risk levels for each of the individual sections. Then as you scroll down, there is a finding and related guidance for each of the topics. And the transcript. By the time that the social worker is seeing this screen on his or her computer, it has already been emailed to the legal department. Here's what the email box looks like for the content experts. For each session that's run, there is an individual email with the report attached, and in the subject line, the overall risk level is identified. And in addition to these emails, there's also a database that has been updated based on the fact values provided by the user and the conclusions derived by the system. So there we are. That's the standard full-length report for the Risk Detector application. To recap, the Risk Detector enables the legal staff to immediately see signs of legal problems that clients may have. The overall goal of the application is to enable the social workers and the legal staff to work efficiently and most effectively to meet the needs of the clients. On behalf of everyone on the development team, thanks for watching. This is Kevin Mulcahy for Neota Logic.